One of the many lessons David Simon tries to teach us with The Wire was that there are no winners of the game. Whether it be during the show or after, everybody was eventually going to lose, and those who at the end of the show we might have deemed winners, well, that win is only temporary. And such is what I want to explore in today's video. What's bound to happen to those who seemingly won the game on The Wire? For how long will Slim Charles remain king? For how long will Michael Lee last as seemingly the next Omar Little? Will Thomas Carcetti stay true to his word and fix the issues in Baltimore? Or will he just carry on climbing up the political ladder? Will Stan Valchek be able to finish out his term as commissioner? And will Marlo Stanfield be able to resist the urge to go back to the street? And will he try to make it in the legitimate world surrounded by sharks like Andy Krocek?
I saw only the one of them. He was black.
Slim Charles was one of those characters who, you didn't fully appreciate his genius up until the moment he took the crown. Him choosing to not pick up the phone on a Sunday morning because there was no win in saying yes or no to the hit on Omar and his granny. Him politely declining Marlo's offer to become CEO. So to not find himself under the thumb of somebody bound to be on the police's radar. They're all plays you don't appreciate until you see how badly they screw the person who did what Slim chose not to do.
What y'all wait to see, Avon? Man, I hear y'all shot the crown off an old lady's head yesterday.
As a king, Slim Charles finds himself in a very unique position, as he's one of few characters on the show who witness firsthand what specific actions cause the downfall of every kingpin. Avon Barksdale was too tolerant of his second-in-command, running around and making plays against the interests of the organisation.
I need you to hit somebody.
Who we hit?
Clay Davis.
Stringer Bell was too caught up in his whole businessman in the street persona, and because of such underestimated the likes of Omar, Joe and Mouzone. Prop Joe made the crucial mistake of introducing his enemies to the one thing that was keeping him afloat.
My connect had people there when the shit went down. If that's what you need to make you believe, you can hear it straight from him.
And Marlo Stanfield dropped so many bodies it was only a matter of time before his reign came to an end at the hands of the BPD.
My number's 23 in the office pool. I still have hope.
And such is a unique position Slim finds himself in, as he now has the perfect guidebook on what not to do as a Baltimore kingpin. And so what could possibly go wrong for Slim Charles as well as the co-op? Well, the boring but truthful answer would be that of,
It's always gonna be a Marlo, man.
and no matter how in sync or invisible the co-op and Slim become to the likes of, say, the BPD, there's always going to be that one player who forces them to take action, who forces them to step out into the light. Maybe it's Michael Lee who robs Slim's stash houses, or maybe it's a new player who believes it's his turn to wear the crown. Point being that there's going to be issues Slim has to deal with, no matter how in sync he and the other dealers in the co-op are. Now sure, he'll most definitely deal with a Michael Lee or a Marlo better than the likes of Avon and Joe did, simply because unlike the other kings he now has a guidebook advising him on what not to do. But he's soon going to find himself on the likes of Sid Nor's radar, a policeman who, similar to McNulty, just won't be able to let it go. And if what we're led to believe on the show is true, that being that the game ultimately takes away everything its players value, Avon his family, Stringer his dreams, and Marlo the actual game itself, then Slim is destined to lose the thing he values most, that being his pragmatism. And one may argue that we're hinted at Slim slowly starting to lose such when he takes out Cheese, the one decision on the show where he acted emotional instead of pragmatic.
What the fuck you do that for? Now we short the 9.
That was for Joe.
This sentimental motherfucker just cost us money.
But to answer the question of, how long will Slim Charles remain king? I would say far longer than the 4 kings who came before him. However, I just can't help but feel that the murder of Cheese could be his undoing, as all it takes is for one of those gangsters to pick up a charge and rat Slim out for a murder they bared witness to, as Bunk says to Randy in the final season.
Son, the thing about murder is it never goes off the books.
And such might act as the beginning of the end for Slim, similar to how D'Angelo murdering that security guard in front of an entire lobby of people acted as the beginning of the end for Avon Barksdale. Now, to call Michael Lee a winner might be reaching.
I don't know.
However, come the end of the show, he's a free man who, dare I say, is in a slightly better position than what he was previously in. His brother's finally going to be raised in a suitable household, and Michael no longer has to follow the orders of that sociopath Marlo, whose people are also no longer after him. With that freedom, Michael decides to become a stick-up artist, and his first victim is that of Vincent, which tells us that Michael Lee isn't just in it for the money, but like Omar Little, he also wants to build a rep for himself. And it wouldn't surprise me if he soon started going after Slim Charles and his product, seeing as though Slim, similar to Avon in Season 1, would be one of the biggest names on the West Side. However, Slim had learnt a little something when with Avon, that being to not restrict yourself to people in the game. And like they did with Omar's granny, Slim would look to track down Michael's people, his mother, his brother, and if they wait long enough they soon might catch a glimpse of Michael, seeing as though he still has to pay off his auntie for looking after Bug. Point being that Michael is going to have to deal with a whole different kettle of fish in Slim Charles. And at this stage in his life, Michael isn't Omar. He hasn't had 9 years experience ripping and running. In the grand scheme of things, he's rather new to this part of the game. Slim Charles, however, is not, and I feel that once Michael Lee makes a move on Slim's territory, and in turn makes himself known, he isn't going to last nearly as long as Omar did. And so to answer the question of, how long will Michael Lee last as seemingly the next Omar Little? It all depends on who he makes his enemy. Is he smart enough to realise that going after Slim at this moment in his life would be suicide? Then yeah, he might last a while. However, if he doesn't, he and his people,
Us both would be cadaverous motherfuckers.
Thomas Carcetti is one of those characters who you want to justify his actions because deep down you believe he's eventually going to fix Baltimore. He's eventually going to live up to all those promises made in Season 4. And that he's only climbing the political ladder because unlike everybody else who wants that power for their own well-being, Carcetti wants it so that he can finally achieve his goal of fixing Baltimore. However, let me ask you all a question. What's to say that the Thomas Carcetti we see in Season 3 and parts of Season 4 wasn't at one point in time Mayor Royce? And that over time Royce had completely lost track of his original goal, as every decision he made became more about keeping him in power, rather than addressing the actual problem. He spent more time unfounding rapes and assaults to make his stats look good, than he did fixing the city, telling himself in the back of his mind that he'll eventually address the actual issue. However, where Royce at some point in time seemingly came to the realisation that this issue is unfixable, Carcetti seems to be under the impression that the higher the position the more good he can do, when in actuality it's the higher the position the bigger the bowl of shit. And where Royce will only be hated by those in Baltimore, Carcetti will continue to climb the ladder, convincing himself that once he's president he'll then be able to fix the issue, by which time he won't only be hated by an entire city, but also an entire state. To answer the question of would Carcetti stay true to his word,
No, motherfucker.
he'll most likely end up like the man his character was based on, Martin O'Malley, who by the sounds of it became a complete joke when he tried to run for president in 2016. Stan Valchek can best be described as a political force of nature, and such is proven throughout and most definitively at the end of the show, seeing as though Valchek is somehow promoted to commissioner, despite being about as inept as Irvin Burrell when it comes to actual policing. But for how long do we think Valchek will last as commissioner? Will he finish his 5-year term? Or will he get forced out like the incompetent commissioner before him? Well, with Nerys as mayor, it's safe to say that Valchek's position for a time is secure, seeing as though her and Valchek's stance on crime is closely aligned. That being of course to just juke the stats and not address the actual issue. And as we saw with Burrell, so long as a rogue police commander like Bunny, or a naive city councilman like Carcetti doesn't come along and rattle the system, Stan shouldn't have much to worry about. But what happens in 2 years come election? What happens when the cycle repeats itself? and a new Carcetti starts promising change to both the city and the department.
Stats for years, and they'll do it again once the neighborhoods complain. That's all they know.
Yeah, well, if the old dogs can't get the job done, I'll find new ones who can.
Well, Valchek has proven to be very wise when it comes to playing the middle. If he senses Nerys is about to drown, he'll jump ship and offer the new mayoral candidate something of value.
Tommy, remember, anything you need.
Point being that Stan isn't going to be as easy as Burrell when it comes to kicking him out the door. He's going to fight tooth and nail before he even thinks about resigning. And because of such, I do see him finishing out his tenure as commissioner. However, it's going to be a messy one, and I find it hard to believe that he's going to have many allies left come the end of it. I also don't see him being rewarded a job similar to Burrell come his leave. As Nerys tells Clay,
And look at Burrell. He goes quietly, and now he's making 12 a year more than when he was commissioner. And working half the hours. You think that happens if he does the piss and moan?
And Valchek is most definitely going to do the piss and moan. So to answer the question of, will Valchek finish his term as commissioner? The answer is yes. However, he's going to lose a lot of political alliances, ultimately killing whatever hopes he had outside of being commissioner. Now, before I delve into the fate of Marlo Stanfield, I want to make something clear. Marlo is not a quote-unquote winner of the game, as he lost the one thing he deemed valuable, that being the actual game itself. However, because his character's ending really seemed to annoy a lot of people, that being that he left the game with his freedom and all his money, I want to attempt to answer the question of, what happened to Marlo Stanfield after the show ended?
Again? Jesus, Bunk.
Well, my answer as explained in my video on Marlo's fate was that he doesn't go back to the street, but he more than likely does still get arrested. He tries to make it in the legal world once he realises in the final episode that to be the king of the streets ultimately meant nothing. However, to be the king of the legal world, now maybe that's something he can shift his mindset to. Or maybe Levy just forces him into this venture because his life is on the line too.
Client walks away now. Or the both of you don't walk at all.
Now, because of Marlo's street-like mentality, he's very susceptible to wanting to deal with people similar to how Stringer Bell wanted to deal with Clay Davis.
I need you to hit somebody.
Who we hitting?
Clay Davis.
And Marlo has proven to be just as emotional and brain dead when it comes to dealing with people not just in the game, but also outside of it. Take for example the time he humiliated that security guard, just to feel powerful after he himself had just been humiliated at the poker. And I feel once the inevitable arises, and Marlo gets played by, say, an Andy Krawcheck, I see him wanting to make an example out of Andy, only to realise that this isn't the street, and it's off to prison you go.